As Shinabe people, we are at war again for our land. And when we say our land, we don't mean
considerations on oil pipelines, the fossil fuel industry, divestment, and climate change. Now on Democratic Visions, here's producer Jeff Straight.
Too many of our electeds are behaving as if global warming were a game of badminton.
Remember, it's the most conservative, recalcitrant, reluctant countries on earth, even the United States. If the world officially believes anything about climate change, it's that 2 degrees is too much.
Time is running out.
Of these and into our
Patty O'Keefe is the coordinator for Minnesota 350's divestment program. Patty, welcome to Democratic Visions.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, what is the divestment program?
Divestment is the opposite of investment. Divestment is a tactic that has been used over the last century to elicit social or political change around a given issue. The act of actually taking your money, taking your investments out of a company or a set of companies to elicit social or political change around an issue. In this case, it's the top 200 companies that have the most reserves worldwide in coal, oil, and natural gas.
So we're talking about pipeline companies, mining companies, oil drilling companies, things like this. So how does it work?
In Minnesota, we're asking folks to divest from the same list of companies that other people around the world are asking their decision makers to divest from, and that's the top 200 fossil fuel companies that have the most reserves in coal, oil, and natural gas that are on this list that an organization called Carbon Tracker has put together. Your ExxonMobil's, Chevron, Shell, BP, to name a few. The fossil fuel industry at large is contributing over 1/3 of our global greenhouse gas emissions, which is a driving force of worldwide climate change. But most of them are in...
And this is happening not only in Minnesota, but worldwide.
Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden. So, yep, divestment is an issue that 350.org supports and that it's working on. There have been many divestment movements in the past. Some of the more notable ones have been the divestment movement in the 1980s to divest from companies doing business in South Africa in lieu of apartheid, from weapons, from big tobacco. I think that divestment has helped to catalyze a movement of people that really wants to connect the dots between the impact that the fossil fuel industry is having on climate change and the impacts that we are seeing worldwide.
I would imagine they're investing millions of dollars in lobbyists and propaganda to support their side.
They contribute about $40,000 a day to lobbying in Washington for the industry itself, and then there's millions of dollars put into that's donated to think tanks that helps to spur climate denial ideologies. So there's actually been quite a bit of divestment activity in Minnesota. There's a lot of divestment activity across the United States. There are over 350 campus campaigns as well. Divestment as a tactic is very accessible. Anyone or anything that invests is likely invested in fossil fuels if they're using traditional investment strategies. So we're seeing divestment campaigns at colleges and universities and faith communities, at municipal and state levels, within foundations, small businesses. And so it's really been successful across a variety of different institutions, but it really has become an international movement.
If someone has a question about your program, how can they contact you?
So you can either go to our website at www.mn350.org. You can also contact me directly at Patty, Patty, at mn350.org. I help to directly support fossil fuel divestment campaigns and can help give resources, answer questions. There's also a divestment team that exists within the Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light organization. And so I would probably redirect them, anyone who's working with a faith institution, to that team, because they work to specifically support folks in faith communities.
Minnesota 350, of course, has other initiatives. What are they?
Yeah, divestment is just one. We also work to stop the expansion of tar sands oil in Minnesota by pipeline and by rail. We also work to inspire people to be talking more about climate change in their daily conversations with friends and family. And we do quite a bit of work within the legislature promoting climate-friendly legislation.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the adoption.
Are there any bills we have to be worried about?
Yes, there are. There's a bill, House File 843, that's authored by Representative Pat Garofalo.
Yeah.
That bill looks to take away our greenhouse gas reduction goals as a state and also really gut some of this really great solar programming that has existed now in Minnesota for the last couple of years.
Pray tell, why does Representative Garofalo want to have this done?
It's a little confusing, actually, because Representative Garofalo did vote for the Next Generation Energy Act in 2007, which was a bill that instated our greenhouse gas reduction goals. So he was in favor of that legislation, has since joined a group called ALEC, which is a conservative think tank that has pretty much, we believe, has had a pretty strong hand in crafting some of this legislation. He believes that by passing this bill, we're going to be able to do more as a state for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, which is ridiculous because he's trying to take away the actual goals and benchmarks that get us to that place, that get us to those reduction goals.
House File 843, the Omnibus Employment and Economic Development Bill, passed the House on April 22nd and was sent to the DFL-dominated Senate for its consideration. The differences between the House and Senate versions of this bill will be worked out in a conference committee before it is returned for final passage and then reviewed and passed or possibly vetoed by Governor Dayton.
What passing this bill would mean, it would mean a few different things. It would mean that there would be less funding for solar in the state of Minnesota. We would no longer have our greenhouse gas reduction goals as a state. It cuts funding for a study that looks at getting our state to 80% to 100% renewable energy within the next 30 years. And so it's really, really important that our legislators know that we're not in support of this bill and of this legislation.
So what can voters do?
You can call your state legislators and tell them that they must take a strong stance against this legislation.
The delivery of Bakken and crude oils through northern Minnesota via rail or pipeline has been an urgent concern of groups like Friends of the Headwaters and Honor the Earth, the Pollution Control Agency, and a number of Minnesota cities. Here's Tim O'Brien and State Senator John Marty in February.
So tell me about some of your environmental stance. What do you think about these pipelines that are going to traverse the sea across the state up in
Very concerned about the pipelines. They're not meant for Minnesota use. They're meant to go through Minnesota.
We're a transporter.
Yes. The only thing I can say about the pipelines that's positive is rail transportation of oil is not a very safe thing, as we see the recent incident in West Virginia where even the newer rail cars exploding. It's a huge problem. I'm really pleased the Dayton administration's, the Pollution Control Agency actually stepped in and said, we got to protect the wetlands, we got to protect our natural areas here. We can't do what Enbridge Pipeline Company wants to do. We've got to do it the right way if we're going to do this. And I'm really pleased. They took a bold stand. The Pollution Control Agency in the past has never done things like that. I got to say, if we're going to put pipelines in, we got to make sure they're safe. We got to make sure they're not destroying the environment. Huge issue.
The proposed new Sandpiper pipeline is still being considered by the State Public Utilities Commission. For the project to move forward, that panel would have to issue a certificate of need, but will do so only if it determines that the project is in the best interest of society as a whole, and if no other reasonable alternative can be found.
As Shinabe people, we are at war again for our land. And when we say our land, we don't mean ownership of land. We mean that that lake, that rice is part of us.
Anishinaabe peoples oppose any pipelines that pass through their areas. They have said so repeatedly, with clarity and high merit.
Like many people up here did not even know about the pipeline to start with. And then besides not knowing about the pipeline, there's a lot of mystery as to what is in the Bakken oil.
Winona LaDuke is Executive Director of Honor the Earth.
And what we know is that you can live without oil, but you cannot live without water.
The environmental and justice movement produced this video statement.
We were instructed in our migration story to go to the place where the food grows on the waters. It's our most sacred food, first food eaten, and usually the last food served to the elderly. It is served at our feasts and ceremonies. Where there is wild rice or manoomin, there are Anishinaabe people.
We were told, protect it with your life. Our whole livelihood is in jeopardy.
It's our survival, the very thing that carries us throughout the year. One of the few things that we eat at every season, every moment of our lives. We eat rice. And then we gather it again to do it again. Because if that rice dies, we will die. It's our responsibility to protect that.
I stand with Honor to the Earth.
Democratic Visions is independently crafted by volunteers, mostly Democrats, from Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, Edina, and Bloomington.